Well, hey, and welcome to this month's guest interview with Peter Krogh. Peter, we first met, I don't even want to say how many years ago. I think it was 6 or even 7. COVID may have pushed it on to 7 years ago. In an interview on the Photoshop show where Jan Kabili and I talked about organizing our images and Lightroom. And you came and you schooled us. You really gave us a fantastic presentation. And I thought, who better to bring back for an interview than the guy who wrote the damn book? You wrote the book, Digital Asset Management for Photography and the damn Lightroom Workflow. And yeah, welcome. And it's good to see you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Always great to talk photography and help people figure out what to do with their stuff and how to make the most use of it. And happy to see people again,
Yeah.
even if it's virtually, still spending too much time in the studio by myself.
Yeah, I'm doing the same, but day by day it's opening up, isn't it?
Yeah.
Things are changing. Even though it's a little more open, I'm still a little apprehensive. We get used to a rhythm and a pattern, and
yeah,
now we have to get used to being able to be together again.
Yes.
So let's dive in. Probably one of the scariest things for new photographers and even some experienced photographers is how do I control this growing library of sometimes hundreds of thousands or even millions of images that we end up building over a lifetime. Digital's been around for a long time now. I had my first what I call real digital camera, I think in 2007. And so it's been around, and we've replaced our film libraries with digital libraries. And I know I now have hard drives full of images. And so the big question is, and this is what I'm hoping to cover in our time together is what's the holy grail? What are those top 3 things that you could share with us that photographers most need to be aware of, even if we can't do them all at once? And in the end, what's the number 1? So I'll kind of hand it over to you with that.
Sure. The difficulty of consolidated collection management is often exacerbated by being a little too ad hoc in too many different ways, and definitely important to develop systems to try and be disciplined about sticking to the systems that you've got. Sometimes that could include actually documenting what you're trying to do. I use Google Docs for nearly everything these days, and it lets me either just remind myself and puts it in a place where I can find it no matter where I am, but also lets me collaborate with other people. And I've got a whole lot of different things going on, including a lot of fairly complex multi-year and multi-step projects. And it's super important to keep things documented and to try and be consistent. So that, that's a huge part of it. And it's really easy to get sort of pushed into working on one thing differently than other things. And then you have material that is sort of hanging out there. So I'll talk a little bit about sort of how we approach this as a system.
Good. I want to bring up the most important thing you said there was, and I'm gonna do my best to take some notes while we go. So if I'm looking down in a way, I'm not ignoring you. I'm just trying to remember some stuff because this is important stuff. But sticking to a system, probably the most important thing we could start with. I know in my early days I was all over the place until I came around to a system that worked for the way I organize. For example, I don't work really good with dates, although dates are important. Fortunately, Lightroom allows me to sort by date really quickly, so that doesn't have to be my first consideration.
Mm-hmm.
I think in terms of either client or destination. So I do portraits and travel. And so the way my brain works is my high level stuff is by year, but within the year I organize with portraits by client or by destination for travel. And that feeds the way my brain works. I know other people do it differently and it works well for them.
Yeah. So a couple of things. First of all, sort of on a big picture level, your digital workflow should really be a thing that you can visualize as a flow, as a path from the camera to a permanent for now home and a centralized photo archive. And that allows you to see sort of where the material is as it's moving from camera to archive. And there's an important conceptual principle that's different between analog and digital work. In the analog world, it was really important to file pictures in a folder. It had to be in a place, and it had to be in a place where you could find it. And so for the vast majority of people, that was, if it's slides, like folders organized by subject. Roll film would often just be rolls sequentially. Maybe you had an index, maybe you just kind of poked through them. But in the digital world, the handling of the object itself, the digital object, the file, is very different than the handling of the image. And I think one of the really important things is to have this vision of the pictures I shoot moving on a steady and systematized way from that camera through download, through ideally a set of processes that include renaming, adding some basic metadata to describe the shoot. If you need to throw stuff out, you can do it then. If you need to, if you want to, I change things to DNG if you want to do that before archiving, and then put everything in an archive. And that doesn't mean you're done with it. It just means the file is safely put away. And data that is unchanging, it's not getting a new name, it's not being refoldered, it's not being moved around, is the easiest to preserve. And that's a really key thing. If you have stuff on a drive and you're kind of shuffling it to another drive, and you it's easy to get lost. It's easy to forget that you didn't quite get it all the way into its permanent home. Your story of the drive with lots of important pictures that didn't make it all the way through the workflow. Is a perfect example of that. And so, the stuff that's stored in my photo archive, which in my case is is an iMac with a bunch of hard drives attached to it, sitting in a locked closet. I am not done with those pictures. They're super valuable to me, and I consider a living body of work. And yet, the advantage we have with digital photography is that the vast majority of what we shoot, you don't actually change the original file. So you can put it away, you can back it up securely, and know that you will have it in the event of a problem in the future.
Yeah.
And that helps. It helps a lot to envision that path, that workflow.
Let me just share an example of how that happened. I had mentioned, and I've shared that story in the past, of losing that very important drive and having to pay a lot of money to get back less than half of the images. And that was a lesson to me, because I thought I had it down. I thought I had it figured out. But I did forget to verify the workflow was actually happening. And I assumed I had it on another drive and in the cloud, and I didn't. But what happened was, when I got that drive back, I got it back and it was a bit of a mess. But one of the things that was intact was the original file names. And so when I moved them back into the folder structure in Lightroom, all the edits applied.
Yeah.
It was beautiful. Like it literally saved me in the end, having this wonderful program called Lightroom that is is a non-destructive workflow, that its catalog, once it recognized the file coming back, my catalog still had all the edits. And so that was a huge time saver.
Yeah. It also lets you know what went missing, which,
Yeah,
might
I can see
might
right
be
away
something that actually just tortures you, but
what has a question mark and what doesn't. Yeah.
but it also, depending on how you have your catalog built, potentially you could extract the previews from the Lightroom catalog and at least have a representation of those pictures, even if it's not the highest value.
Yeah.
One thing that event pointed out to me is a place where you can probably improve your workflow, and that is to be using large drives for your archive. And it is unquestionably easier to manage a smaller number of higher capacity drives than it is to have a shelf full of hard drives. And
Absolutely.
and these days, there's a little bit of a weird price glitch due to this Chia blockchain thing, but the large drives are very economical. And right now, if you're buying a hard drive and you have a lot of photos, you should be looking in that 12 to 16 terabytes per drive.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that they did in redesigning hard drives to have such high capacity is that they actually put 2 playheads in the drives now. So they've gotten a lot faster. So you can think of the playhead as like the tone arm on a record player.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you can only play one song at a time if you have only one tone arm. But if you have 2 tone arms and the discs are spinning, you can theoretically get twice the throughput. And that's what's happening now. So, if you have a number of drives that are in the, 1, 2, 4, 6, 8 terabyte range, you definitely do yourself a major favor by consolidating onto a smaller number of higher capacity drives.
That's really good advice. And this is what I've run into, is realizing that, the main backup drives in my computer are bigger drives, 8 terabytes. They can go bigger now, but I do have a lot of smaller 1 and 2 terabyte drives that I use systematically, but it creates a collection of smaller drives, which over time is really inconvenient.
Yeah. And it's a real pain to back it up. If your incident is a perfect example of, I've got, what I think are, 6 or 8 or 10 primary drives kind of spread around for different uses or whatever. It's very hard to know that you've properly made your 3, 2, 1 backups, which is my first top tip.
Your first tip. Let's move into that in just 1 second. I just want to highlight, I'm going to do a screen share, and I'm just going to highlight here your website, and I'm going to promote you a little bit. You did write the damn book, and we're going to look at that. This is your website here, and it's thedamnbook.com. And this is 3.0. I believe my copy of this is not quite as current, but a fantastic book. Anybody interested in digital asset management, it's the book to have. And I wanted to go through that, not just digital asset management. One of the things that I really liked was on these pages, you have little videos, and they're short and they're very clear. Now, I want to recommend anybody interested in one of these topics, like the damn book or organize your photos with Lightroom, for example. Now, this is Lightroom 5, and you've already put a disclaimer. This works all the way through CC because very little has changed in Lightroom with data management. There's been new tools added and new algorithms put in, but data management has stayed virtually the same from the early days. So the other thing is multi-catalog workflow, which I'm actually going to download this now because I do a multi-catalog workflow when I travel. And so when I travel, I use a unique catalog that gets added back to my main catalog when I return from the trip. And then this one I loved. I watched it just before we joined today. It's only 4 minutes and 44 seconds, but this one here, digitizing your photos with your camera in Lightroom, because we all have collections of prints hanging around from our families. And this was so clear. I just want to recommend people go and watch that and see if this might be something that would really work for you to help you not just wrap your head around getting pictures of your pictures, but a way to have a consistent workflow from storing them in boxes that even represent how you've stored them in Lightroom. And I thought it was brilliant. And so I just want to kind of direct people here, thedamnbook.com, and you'll be able to find all these sub pages and watch the short videos, and it will light your brain up about how clear Peter is about how he organizes things. So I just wanted to give you that plug before you went on with the
Yeah,
three,
thanks.
two, one.
You know, what my first book in 2005 was basically the first book that said, like, here's the whole ecosystem and how all the parts relate together. And because of the way software was being taught that those days, you know, it's very much like, oh, here's a picture of a screenshot, and you know, do this in Bridge or this in Photoshop, and here's the flyout screen, and then you click on this, and as time has gone by, that is much easier for people
Yeah,
to learn from video. So those books, Multi-Catalog Workflow and Organizing Your Photos and Digitizing Your Photos, are true multimedia books with a lot of short videos explaining specific topics.
yeah,
And, you know, most are sort of between, you know, 1 and 4 minutes long. And, you know, how do you check for dust if you're copying photos, or you know, explaining the keyword functionality in Lightroom. There's just a tremendous amount there. And that takes an entire chapter of short videos. So
yeah,
um, I feel like that explaining with video is just a whole lot easier
yeah,
um,
definitely.
to learn from. It's, you know, it's a lot, it's fewer steps your brain is jumping through. Um, but yeah, the storage part of it. So, you know, I talk about 3, 2, 1 backups, and that's 3 copies of anything that you want to keep, ideally in 2 different media types. Back in the day, that was maybe hard drive and CD or DVD. These days, it's usually hard drive and cloud, or my suggestion is hard drive and cloud for most people.
Yeah,
Um, and so 3 copies, 2 different media types, and 1 stored offsite. And, you know, the logic behind that is if you only have 1 backup and something happens to the primary, then you have 1 chance at recovery. And if, you know, it's certain kinds of virus or malware, just accessing the backup might propagate the corruption.
yeah,
So you want to have at least 2 chances. And this is, you know, this is what the IT professionals do. 2 different media types allow you to protect against very different threats. Again, hard drives, very susceptible these days to ransomware and malware, where it's, you know, it's all over the news. And a cloud backup like Backblaze is one that I recommend, that it is not susceptible to that same level of malware because of the way the files are encoded and stored. So your computer could get locked up, but if you have a Backblaze backup, you should be able to just download that and not worry about paying the, you know, thousands of dollars of Bitcoin to get your files back.
yeah.
Um,
And that
and
speaks to the
yeah,
cloud being, sorry to interrupt, but that speaks to the cloud actually being a true backup. Whereas like my system, when I travel, I have a mirrored drive. Like that's not a true backup. A mirrored drive is going to copy problems over. Like, but I need a
yeah,
mirrored drive so that if one dies in midstream on a trip, I can just plug the other drive in and keep going. That's why I
yeah.
use a mirrored drive, but I don't call that my backup.
Yeah, it's really fault tolerant storage,
Yeah.
mirrored backups. It's a backup you want, and now it is a backup in that if the mechanism on one drive fails, potentially the mechanism on the other drive it has not failed. However, the whole thing could drop off a table or um, be you know be hit with virus or lightning strike or whatever
Yeah.
else happens. So yeah, that's an important part of it, and the offsite is is really important as well. Just fire, theft, flood, lightning strike. Um, that all of those things are very difficult to protect against with all of your copies on site. And fortunately, like Backblaze right now, it's $60 a year, and it will continuously back up your computer and attached drives to the cloud, and uh, it will encrypt the files so that they can't be seen by anybody else while they're up on their service. Now, if you have a 50 terabyte archive connected to your computer, Backblaze may come to you and say, no, that's not the $60 a year plan.
Yeah.
Um, I have not heard of them actually doing it, but this is one of the things um, they look at as a cost of doing business. It's easier for them to just say, like, you can have unlimited backups, and most people won't use it.
Yeah.
And then occasionally, there's people on the shoulder, people, these edge cases that are crazy.
Yeah.
But I think it's a fabulous service. They're about to raise their prices to a whopping $70 a year.
Wow.
So if you get it now, then you save $10 a year. I have it on two of my work computers, my wife's computer, and both of my kids' computers.
Yeah.
And so I totally believe in it. I pay full price. It's a great service.
Yeah. When I committed to one, I there was Carbonite and Backblaze and Crash Plan, and I moved from a consumer crash plan when they closed that down to a business crash plan. It's more money, but it does the same thing. I already
Yeah.
had
Yeah, it's a good service.
7 or 8 terabytes online, so I wasn't going to switch right away. But $60 a year, I guess that's US 60. That's a really good price.
Yeah.
For that kind
Yeah,
of
it is. And they're a good company. And essentially you just gotta let it run, make sure it's turned on. Now that can get a little dicey if you're out traveling, and I was in Africa at one point, and you're paying by the kilobyte for bandwidth.
Yeah.
And I was shooting a lot, and I had to
up.
turn that off for most of the trip and just back up to local drives.
Yeah.
Because you can eat up all your bandwidth, or if you're connecting through your cell phone, that can eat up a lot of your bandwidth. But the set it and forget it part is really great. When my daughters went off to college, I put it on their computers because I knew they would never actually run the backups to the drives that I gave them.
Yeah. What are your thoughts just before we move on? So we have the 3-2-1, three, you got your hard drive, want to have at least 2 different media, and you want to have a cloud backup, or off-site backup if it can't be cloud. I know someone who had kept their entire archive on drives they mailed overseas for a long time. They finally embraced the cloud and now have been putting their whole collection in the cloud. But what do you think of like a Drobo or a Synology, these NAS systems?
Great question. And I was going to go there. So here's the thing. Back in the day, when drives were relatively small, it made a huge amount of sense to get one of these devices that makes multiple hard drives into one big volume. These days, it makes a whole lot less sense for a couple of reasons. But the main one is that most photographers that I know have no idea how to maintain a Linux device. And so these are little Linux computers, and they're running their own operating system. And they may need firmware updates. They, uh, they may or may not have good monitoring and alert software to tell you that there's some kind of a problem. And the number of people that I know, even with very high end systems, who've had total system failure is pretty high. Like,
Wow.
I know far more people who have lost their entire, Drobo or Synology than have ever told me it saved them from hard drive failure.
Hmm.
And
That's interesting because I mean, I hear both sides, and I've heard a lot of people, they really love the ability, especially in a NAS, a network access storage, um, the ability to access their files from home base
yeah,
anywhere
so
they
now
go.
there's a huge other problem, because anything you're doing to open up a port on your uh, on your system at home should not be done by amateurs. And I
Hmm.
would count myself among those. Like, I don't
Okay.
know network security, um, you know, like the pros do.
Yeah.
And again, with ransomware, what's happened with Bitcoin is that they have basically democratized the ransomware industry in overseas areas, and incentivized it to,
Hmm.
uh, and it is an absolute epidemic. And um, the NAS boxes, they're Linux computers. I don't know if you remember the Heartbleed virus a while ago, but there were these viruses that had, like, there's little security holes in the Linux operating system in particular versions, and before they get patched, somebody can come in and be really careful about that. Like, in the world of professional IT, one of the reasons everybody's going to cloud services for this, uh, for lots of what they're doing, is because they do need to allow access from outside the building,
Yeah.
but they don't want them to be able to access the main
The main
storage.
physical computer. Yeah.
Yeah, and
So
so
it's interesting you say that because most of the people really promoting the NAS systems are, when I think about my group of friends, they're IT people. They're people that understand
yeah.
IT. And so I mean, you seem to be camping in use large hard drives. Don't let people get public access and use a secure cloud storage.
Yeah, and then it's, there's a reason that my 2009 book represented a collection of just a big ball of pictures, and the Dan Book 3.0 represents it as a whole bunch of Tinker Toys that are plugged in,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and other ancillary copies of the whole thing. And so, what we see uh, are people, for instance, using a Photo Shelter account or a SmugMug account to have an access copy of the files in a cloud service.
Yeah.
And that allows you to keep your main copy of stuff on a device in your possession that you don't have to open up to the web.
Mm.
And is it being alarmist? I don't know. Let's look around and see the number of people who are being attacked. It's a really serious problem right now, and it's about to get a lot worse. And there's major incentives to for them to for the ransomware people to go after everybody. And so,
Yeah. So if you have let's say you have a NAS, you can run that not networked. You can run that just as a backup redundant storage device.
yeah, or a lot of those will have um, an ability to plug in additional drives, back up with the NAS software, and then
Yeah.
unplug that drive. So then you have an air gapped uh, copy of the files.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Good to know.
that's, so you can do that. A lot of the NAS devices also have the ability for you to um, set up like an Amazon Glacier backup copy. And that's, a thing businesses do. It's not it's not like setting up a photo shelter account. It's more technical and not necessarily for everybody. But
Yeah. I just wanted to kind of cover that because I
yeah,
hear different opinions about it. And I was, up till talking to you today, I didn't realize there was a lot of these issues with like you say, the Bitcoin and the hacking
yeah,
files and then
the
ransomware.
ransomware. Yeah,
That's kind of scary.
yeah, it
Because I would
is.
have been inclined to work with a NAS, or at least not necessarily NAS, but a redundant, like a Drobo system that may have the
Yeah, and
redundant
I mean
stuff.
all of those RAID, Drobo, NAS, they're all basically sort of the same thing. That it's a spanned drive system. There's a
Yeah.
Linux chip that is making multiple drives act like one drive.
Yeah.
It used to be necessary because you needed big volumes, but these days, can you split your 2005 to 2010 work if you have 16 terabytes of work from back then? Can that live on its own drive, which mostly
Yeah. It can.
is mostly inactive, and then you have another drive for 2010 to 2015 or whatever, however you have that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a lot easier to do now,
Okay.
and because they've gotten fast, you don't need the speed of RAID.
Yeah.
But the biggest problem is that photographers are cheap when it comes to to buying services to help them figure out their IT, and that's where they run into trouble. And so if
Yeah.
if you're one of those people like my friend Sam, who is not afraid to spend real dollars on the local computer, a value added reseller, then great.
Okay.
But if you're like me and you just want to
You'll
buy
spend three
drives
thousand
and put
dollars on
your
a
stuff
lens,
on
but
it,
you won't
yeah.
do it on the other end.
So there's that. I would say another thing that's an important corollary of 321 is that you should also know what the primary copy of your data is. And this is another sort of theoretical thing that's a really important one, is that primaries and backups should typically not be interchangeable. There should be a primary copy of your stuff, particularly when we're talking about an archive. Like, I've got it could be on a NAS. Just don't open the port up to the internet. It could be on a NAS, or it could be on hard drives. And I know that's my primary, and I know that I'm backing it up to this other drive, let's say, and to the cloud. Or maybe the cloud isn't affordable for you where you live. Maybe you just back it up to two different drives, but this is the primary and these are the backups. And one of the places people get in is a very common place for people to get themselves in trouble is like, my primary filled up, but I bought my backup drive later. I had some extra room there. I started using that as kind of a surrogate primary for
Oh, yeah.
some of
Yeah.
these files. And then I kind of backed it up to that other drive. These days, with the drives being as big as they are, a centralized, consolidated archive of material that can be duplicated to, at least in my view, for most of your listeners, it's probably going to be to at least one other hard drive copy in your possession, and then either to the cloud, or it could be to another drive copy that you take over to John's house or
Offsite.
whatever.
Yeah.
You don't have to send them overseas. In most cases, it's just take it to your friend's house.
Yeah.
Which.
Yeah. This person is doing overseas. I mean, they're top of the game, pro, millions of images, and they want a disaster redundancy. So
Yeah, I mean, if you live in an earthquake zone or a fire zone or a flood zone, getting it out of your immediate area could make sense. Or if it's you live in a part of the world that's unstable.
So what if we go back to, I don't mean to cut you off there.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Kind of coming back to the everyday user, the photographer. Maybe like a lot of my people are really invested photographers, but they're not all pros. They don't all have massive collections. Going back to kind of looking at Lightroom and maybe hierarchy and workflow. Let's get back to maybe giving some sound advice around that.
Okay, great.
That import, and like you said, I do renaming. where do we go with that as far as what are maybe some?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. One thing that's important to internalize is the understanding that the tags you use, the metadata that you attach to files, is an expression of what's important to you. And that it, in most cases, it doesn't make sense for people to tag, every photo that has a tree in it with the word tree, or, every photo with a dog in it with dog. Um, so, so the metadata that you use is an expression of what's important to you. And that makes it a lot easier to understand what you want to tag with. So for instance, for me, the primary metadata that I use is location information, because that is unambiguous, generally easy to apply, and makes it really generally pretty easy for me to find a picture. I typically know, I have some memory of where that was, what city or country or whatever. So location information, event name, if there is an event, assigning party, and assignment name if it's a job. For people I've worked with for a long period of time, that can be a very deep hierarchical keyword list of the work I've done for PBS, where it was an advertising campaign, and then inside that campaign were 6 or 8 different different shoots. People tags, obviously people are often important to other people, people who need people.
I'll often one of the things I do, you can tell me if you think it's a bad idea, but when I import, I have this rule. I have to import with a minimum of 3 keywords that help me find it in 3 minutes or less. And so if it's a client, it's going to have the client's name. It's always going to have the client's name, because that's the first thing I'm going to look for. If it's a trip, it's always going to have location, and something like that. But I just use this when I'm in a hurry and I'm lazy and distracted. I make sure I always have those 3 keywords, and I ask myself, will I be able to find this in 10 years in 3 minutes? Is my criteria for the least viable product,
And the it's also important to remember that what you're typically wanting to do is just filter out all of the collection that's not this thing, that's not my pictures from Tallinn in Estonia. And so if I tag for Estonia, then, I probably know if I'm looking for something that is a picture that I shot in Estonia, then that gets me there, even though there's thousands of pictures from Estonia. One of the things that Lightroom gives us in particular is this great visual search once you've filtered down to a smallish number of pictures. And that smallish number of pictures can be literally thousands. And scrolling through thousands of photos to find something in Lightroom is not that hard. As opposed to being presented with folder trees with thousands of folders and tens of thousands of images and you have to dive through them one by one. So that metadata that is a basic description is super important. Another thing that's really important is, in my view, as a Lightroom user, or any program that allows this, is to curate inside the catalog. So when you want to put pictures together, whether it's a portfolio or a slideshow, or just you wanting to, experience some portion of your body of work, if you can do that within the catalog itself, then you've, over time, you build up intelligence within the catalog about your collection. And I don't know if you're a collections user within Lightroom, but they absolutely have designed it to be the place you organize your pictures within Lightroom.
Yeah, I do use collections a lot. And I believe you were the person that really opened my eyes. You said, collections is the only thing that appears in every module.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was like, boom, like I got
Yeah.
it at that moment.
Yeah.
Was, wow, it's intended to be used this way.
Yeah. And, I usually follow that with, you could drive your car backwards from DC to New York, but they've made a whole lot of design decisions that are assuming that you're actually going to be driving not in reverse most of the time. And that's really what they've done with collections is they've really built that to be the place that you do your curation. And, you can have multiple levels of curation. You can have alternate sequences of the same set of images quite easily, which, sequencing is such an important part of visual storytelling. And then you can sync those easily to the web, or in my case, I sync it back to my phone. So I have my favorite collections that that are in Lightroom Mobile, and so I've added them. So if I want to find, the pictures of Europe in 2019, there they are. That collection is there. I'm able to say, this is important stuff for me, and go find those pictures.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so curate inside the catalog. I would say also to sort of move on to the next thing, which overlaps with a lot of this your collection is a body of work. It's very helpful to keep as much of it together as you can and practically. And if you can have one single catalog in Lightroom, then it enables a bunch of different stuff. It enables much better data handling, backup, and just sort of general data management. So if you have a single dashboard that has, everything.
Yeah. As we move on, we're going to move into that. But I remember the early days of Lightroom, and a lot of people were complaining because multiple or large image collections, hundreds of thousands of images, everyone complained that Lightroom was too slow. There was a lot of reasons why that was happening. Well, computers just weren't that fast when Lightroom first came out to handle these image files. But I was guilty at the beginning of, I'm going to have a catalog for portraits and a catalog for this and a catalog for that. And it quickly, I realized it wasn't really wise.
Mm-hmm.
And I started consolidating within so that I can go into my folders within a catalog and have almost all my images. Now I have two primary catalogs. One is for tutorials and education that I'm able to move around and change, and it's very light footprint. And the other one's my main catalog. That's it. That's all I have. One main catalog and my one that I do tutorials on. And that's all I found I needed for the last probably 5 years. So I'll just kind of hand it back to you with, that was my own personal discovery, was in the early days, everybody was having multiple catalogs because they felt it would speed up Lightroom, but that's not really the case these days.
Yeah. And it's, it was improvements in computing, but also improvements in the database. I think they've went through essentially 3 rewrites of the Lightroom database, and the way that's handled over time. And, it slows down for different people at different sizes. And that depends on the computer hardware you have, how rich your metadata is, how many different metadata fields you're using, and how much hierarchy you've got. But to the extent that you can make it work with one catalog or as few additional catalogs as possible, you do yourself a huge favor. Consistency of tagging, unification of the file management, and then also, if the concept is that it's a body of work, for me, it's 40 years now of professional photography. There are connections between things that are not obvious to make on a on whichever level I might think that these things are separate,
Yeah.
and it may be like, oh, well, for me, it was very hard immediately to separate personal and professional work because I'm shooting pictures all the time.
Yeah.
So what do I do if I shot 5 pictures and they're really for me in this assignment, and really, I'm going to move them over to another catalog and have a whole nother handling, that's no good.
Yeah.
So I did write that multi-catalog book with the, specific intent of trying to help people understand when you need it and why you need it, and then how you should approach that. And, there's a real difference between I'm traveling, I'm shooting a project, I'm going to have a project catalog, and then I'm going to come back and merge it into my my main catalog. That's different than, in my case, what I have is sort of the works in progress greatest hits that hovers around 120,000 images. And then I have the deep archive, which has everything that I've chosen to keep. And that's, 750,000 pictures or something like that. And it just,
So
and that's a performance thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So from where I'm at, I do that one thing. I'll take a trip. So in January, I'll go back to Antarctica and I'll be gone for 6 weeks. And so I'm going to be bringing a computer and 2 external hard drives and, Lightroom, Photoshop, those things. And so on my trip, not only am I working as a documentarian and a photographer, but I'm a guide and I'll be doing presentations. And so Lightroom just makes that whole process insanely easy. Is I create a folder, I export as a catalog. Now that catalog comes with everything I created with my subcategories. And when I'm in the field now, I have this smaller, lightweight catalog that I'm working with. And even within that, I create collections so that at the end of every day, when I import, I go through them and I assign, because Lightroom makes it lightning fast to apply keywords. Once you've used them, you can just pick them from the 9 keywords that are there. For instance, staff, passenger, wildlife, whatever. My keywords go on really fast so that if I need something that's going to go into the slideshow, it just has SS on as a keyword, SS. And everything with SS goes to slideshow. That's a collection. So I'm working with smart collections. By the time I've done my import and done some really fast keywording on the day's work, which could be 1,000 images, it's already in their collections. So when I come back home, I have it all there. There it is. It just comes back in like that. And
do you use hierarchical keywords?
This is something I don't do, which I should be doing, but I don't.
Yeah, it really is super useful to build those hierarchies for 2 reasons. One is that it makes the information easily navigable. So airplane and jet can both live inside of, air travel, which can live inside of travel. But it also makes it really easy to apply the tags. If you build a natural hierarchy, when you apply the bottom node tag, you're essentially applying all of the tags all the way up. So you don't need to have, travel and Antarctica and the name of this place in Antarctica. If you apply the bottom node, and it gets all of the ones going up.
One of the problems I do have returning from a trip is that when I import that catalog back into the main catalog, that collection merges with the collections that are there, and that can create a problem at the home end. But I'm really done with them at that point. I usually delete the collections from that catalog before bringing them back in because I don't need those subcategories. But
and you can tame that problem a bit by making sure that the collections you make while you're on location are named for that specific trip, and it's a unique collection set name.
Yeah, so I'm going to have
and
to
that
do
way
use collection
everything
set.
can live inside of that, and then you just drag that into your trips collection set, and my view on this is that every time I put pictures into a group in a collection, I'm doing some kind of work that I may want to revisit. And because Lightroom, the collections are so lightweight, and because they can fold up in the hierarchy so nicely, there's no need to decide that I need to toss that information. The key is just making sure it integrates with the hierarchy in a way that doesn't make it worse for you instead of better. So, if you have a bunch of top level collection sets, instead of having it all live inside Antarctica 2021 or whatever it will be, 2022, then it makes it super easy to, you can
I'm going to dive deeper into
preserve that, and then you can dive through it, because it can be useful to say, oh, I've organized this according to this, what we did that day, or who was on the trip, or some other thing. I do like to have a distinction, once you get used to using the hierarchy of keywords, I do like to have a distinction between a description of content, which can include, say, this is the trip, or this is the, specific part of this trip, or this is the assignment, or this is the client name. So that stuff, which I believe all belongs in keywords. And then I keep all of my workflow stuff in collections. So for me, I have a big collection set of slideshows. And the thing about that is that the collections preserve sequencing. So just dragging things into the slideshow, and the name and date for the slideshow allows that.
I'm just looking over at my catalog. I use collection sets as well I'm doing that, but I don't think I'm doing that with regular collections, just with smart collections, because I have one for
and the thing about smart collections is they don't support sequencing.
So and that's interesting, because I have it here. I have them in tutorials, a whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
And some of them are smart, some of them aren't, but yeah.
And I mean, smart collections, it's really just a saved filter, and it helps you to surface material. But this is where, in that video on the website where I talk about store, tag, and create, the tagging, you attach some facts, and that helps you find them. But the real important work, I think, is the curation work that we do to our collections. I'm selecting this as the best picture from this, event, or of this, all the pictures I have of this person, or I'm going to put these together and I'm going to make a statement by I'm going to tell a story with these pictures, and storytelling requires sequencing.
It almost would be an entire episode in itself, but I think if I was to put a ribbon on some best practices, especially the majority of photographers using Lightroom, I have a feeling diving into collections is the primary mode of I guess categorizing or keeping your images organized, or rising to the top, the image collections that you're working on, would be the thing to focus on and learn about. Like, I know it's really, I need to learn more, but I use them quite extensively, collections now, both when I travel and in my home catalog. But I think I'm going to use them even more now. And then hierarchical
keywords really help. And, I think there's an important philosophical point here, in thinking about the difference between store, tag, and create. The media handling, the storage, it really is like either right or wrong. You've put it away in an organized fashion, and you've backed it up properly, and it's still there. And especially in a Lightroom context, where Lightroom just really wants you to put it away and not rename it, not move it. It's a super orderly process that you either do right or wrong. The tagging layer, attach some facts to this that tell me about it, so that I can ignore everything that is not this. is is a relatively clean process because it's, these were shot in this location as part of this assignment. The camera's theoretically tagging it with the correct date already. So all of that's happening. But then the creative process, this super high value part that sits on top, the curation process, it is unavoidably messy. And that's the beauty of collections, is that they are built for you to be as messy as you want to be. As you plug things together and see if it works, or no, it doesn't work, or wow, this other thing that I didn't think belonged at all actually does belong in here, and I can give that a try, and I can even save it, come back to it, show it to a friend or whatever. Yeah. So it is a progression from something that should be very very rational and orderly, up to something that's a little more fuzzy, to something that is a very messy process.
Yeah. So the pain of being disciplined in the beginning lets you be a little bit looser and more free in the end.
Yeah. And I would say even, all artwork is done within a context of a structure. A sonnet is 14 lines. And so that structure enables you to then, tell a story, make a statement, do whatever you're doing with your creative work within that context. And ideally, in a perfect world for digital asset management, the management part of it disappears the more you systematize it, regularize it, standardize it, whatever. The more that disappears, and then the thing that's sitting in front of you is your creative work to say, well, what am I going to try and say with these pictures?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So we've covered a lot. I think we're sitting at about an hour already. How did that happen?
I think we are.
Wow. Always great to have a conversation. We're going to move into a private Q&A, but I want to thank you for coming and doing the public version of the interview. We'll get this up onto YouTube. Is there anything you want to share that you want people to go to specifically? Any projects you're working on?
Yeah.
You're welcome to do a screen share if you need.
Yeah. And let's see, can I share screen here?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm pretty sure it's turned on for you. Yeah.
There we go. Okay. Share. And let's open a new tab. So the thing I've been working on for the last year and a half is a multi-user institutional digital asset management system, sort of like Lightroom for companies, but without the develop module. Okay. So like a super Lightroom library for companies. And it's called Tandem Vault, and it's a 10-year-old company. And I was hired as the chief product officer. And so we have a lot of, the collections look a heck of a lot like
pretty similar. Yeah.
Collections in Lightroom. The keyword tree, it looks just like Lightroom. As a matter of fact, it integrates directly with Lightroom. You can export your Lightroom keyword tree and import it there. But we have a lot of capability for multiple users because it is an institutional tool. It's for universities or conservation organizations, and but then we're also doing some really cool stuff that I think is going to become standard in the rest of the world. And that's so for us, a keyword is not just a string of letters, but you can actually put a definition in a keyword, and then you can put an unlimited number of web links in a keyword to tell you about that. So in this case, August Wilson, the playwright, you can say who he is, and then you can have all these links that tell you the importance of August Wilson, and whether that's a place or an event, or a person, or just a conceptual term. You can add all of this information. And the stuff that we have in Lightroom we take for granted as single user applications, because
Yeah.
it doesn't exist out in the rest of asset management world for institutions. It really is amazing to me that this stuff just doesn't really exist there. But anyway, so we have a ton of cool stuff in here, and it's been just a fabulous experience to work with my team. And
good. Fantastic project.
if you work with an institution and you need a media library, not just photos, videos, PDFs, whatever, that's what I've been working on.
Good to hear. Yeah, that's excellent.
So Q&A, yeah.
I was just going to say thanks for doing that portion. I'm just
Yeah.
going to do a little pause, and we shouldn't wait 6 or 7 years to chat again.
Deal.
Thanks for being the guest today.
Sure.